o'clock. Okay, so welcome to all of you. Welcome to those in the YouTube and Facebook universe. I'll put this on Facebook as well. So remind any Oratory Synagogue members out there, if you have not sent your renewals in, please do as soon as you can. If you love the synagogue and have not yet become a part of it, please do. And help us end last year strong and begin the next year strong. Okay, that's the commercial. All right, so tonight is the part of the series that I wanted to begin last week, which is thoughtful, not ideological. The reason I didn't was because the one before was on close reading of text, and we studied a piece of Talmud and a piece of Torah, and they really want to do the Talmud part. So I said, fine. So we'll start with thoughtful, not ideological next time. And then tonight was going to be current events, and I thought to myself, which current event? Well, there are so many to cover, and I thought to myself, well, the main thing is the collapse of civility. That we can't even talk about current events, don't worry about it. So what I'd like us to do tonight is remember that there are, roughly speaking, two streams in how we conduct our business here in the United States politically. One is what I call throwing elbows. And I think this has been since the very beginning of our democracy. If you go back and look at the history of even Washington's terms in office and so forth, there's a lot of bitterness, a lot of hatred, a lot of suspicion, and it's been continuous in every administration since George Washington. Okay? On the other hand, there is a stream that asks, can we reason together? And I stand very firmly in, can we reason together? For a couple of reasons. One is, when I reason with someone with whom I differ, and we're respectfully for each other, it's very likely I will walk away smarter. Because it's someone that I know and respect, and they think differently, there's probably something I don't know. And the same is possible for them. That's number one. Number two, we've already set a relationship where, when we differ, we know that we can talk to each other. And I know I've changed my ideas over the years, and some of the people that I've talked to have changed. So what I'd like us to do is see this synagogue as a place where people can talk about tough things very calmly, very thoughtfully, not with the purpose to persuade, although that might happen, more with the purpose to, you might say, uncover. So what do we uncover? First of all, we uncover our values and axioms that are at play. So whatever stand you're taking, there's probably a value or an axiom at play that you may have never talked about because no one ever asked you. The second thing is there are ways of understanding the facts. Now, I believe that facts are facts. I'm not a relativist. But some of us are more tuned into some sets of facts. Others are tuned into different sets of facts. They're both factual. We just focus on different things. And then there are actually those who massage the truth or don't tell the truth. Okay? We have to be able to distinguish it. So name calling doesn't help people learn to distinguish. It just makes people defensive. And the third thing is discussing how your policies line up with your values and your facts. So if I believe we should do something, if I advocate some course of action, ideally I would be able to share with you what my values are, the facts as I understand them, and how my policies lined up with my values and my facts. And then I want to hear you tell me what you think we should do, what your values and axioms are, how you see the facts, policies that you recommend, and then we can intelligently ask each other questions. Okay? So that's the rules for tonight. Okay? There's no flaming, no attacking. There's only, here's the issue, here's how I see it, here's what I recommend, here's my values, here are the facts that I see them. I'd love to hear the other side. Is that fair? Okay. So on any question raised, I'll give a very brief analysis of what I think. And if my own values are at stake, I want to really, really be very open on where I stand with things. I call myself, in general, a social liberal, economically probably moderate to conservative, with a very libertarian stream running through all of it. Okay, so that's how I see myself. So you say, well, how can you believe this and this? I'll say, well, I'm socially liberal, for example, pro-choice, etc. economically somewhat conservative, meaning one has to look at the financial implications of any policy. You can't just ignore the financial implications. And libertarian, which is, I really don't like the idea of other citizens telling other citizens what to do unless it really matters. Other citizens meaning the government. The government is a collection of citizens. They come to me and say, hey, Finley, we've decided that you need to think this, say this, do that. Okay, so that's my libertarian instinct is we should more or less leave each other alone unless we have a very compelling reason not, to not do that. Okay, so those are my politics, and if it comes into play, I'll be very honest with you about my values, policies, commitments. Again, not that I'm recommending them to you, but I don't think I want any of you to think that I have like a hidden agenda that I'm heading towards something. I'd rather just tell you at the beginning what I think, and then that doesn't mean anything. Doesn't mean it's Jewish or better, wise, wrong. It's just I want to be open with you. Does that sound okay? All right. So does anybody have something that they want to talk about? I think I know what people want to talk about first, but I don't want to presume anything. People that we want to actually try to look at from this perspective, something we want to have a discussion about. You want to propose? Yeah. Good.
I'd like you to tell me what you think. How is Trump making positive moves vis-a-vis truth, love, and justice vis-a-vis his attack on the press as the enemy of the people?
Okay, so you're asking me, how do I understand Trump promoting truth? That sounds like a loaded. Yeah, that sounds like a loaded question.
It's a statement.
Yeah, it's a statement. It's not a question. Yeah, it's a statement.
I'm saying, how do you feel about that?
I've made the fact that I detest Trump public over and over and over again, and I really don't want to spend time doing that tonight. It's like he's a detestable person. So do we need to talk about that? No. Okay, so let's not.
How do you combat that?
Okay, so you're asking me, how do I combat somebody, the president, who plays loose with the truth? Okay, is that an interesting question?
Good.
Okay, I would say, be impeccable in your own words. Impeccable. So here's what I've seen. I read the LA Times, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, I listen to NPR. I see a lot of slipshod behavior with facts and truth on all sides. Nothing as extreme as Trump. And I don't watch any cable news, otherwise I would probably say Fox News, but I'm going to put that aside. But I read diligently. And whenever I read the news, the important fact comes on the 30th paragraph. Like the thing that modifies the assumption. I'll give you a very simple example. On the Gaza protest. Now, since I know people there and I know what's going on, people say the Gaza blockade. You all tell me what a blockade is. What's a blockade? What is, nothing gets in, nothing goes out. I say to people, well, what about the two border crossings where thousands of tons of material is transferred to Gaza on a daily basis? They say, really? I said, okay, so you claim what's happening in Gaza, and you don't know that thousands of tons of materials are transferred into Gaza every day. So the word blockade is not true. It's just not true. You might call a closure, meaning the only thing that gets in is things that have been vetted to make sure they don't include military material and tools for terrorism. That's fair. So why do I keep reading in the New York Times, LA Times, Wall Street Journal about a blockade? Okay? My answer is because people actually are loose with words. Okay, I looked at the protest. Now, I'm giving an extended example so we can move on. The Israeli soldiers on that berm above the border and see that concertina wire, they know what Hamas wants. And you all know what Hamas wants? They want to bust open the border, have 1,000 people rush, because I believe, I can't prove this, but I believe they want a massacre. Yeah, okay. Now, therefore, the Israeli soldiers, what they have to do is the minute they see someone coming too close, because they don't want to wait to the last second when they actually do bust the border. They say, look, you stay X number of yards back, you're safe. You cross that line, we'll have to shoot, because if you breach that border, it's going to get worse for everybody. So they say, okay, we heard you, and now they come up to the concertina line. Okay? Now, I know that to be true. I'm looking for the reporting, and where they say, Israel shot protesters. That's actually so far from true. They shot people who were trying to penetrate the border so other people could rush the Israeli positions. That's what's true. So I look in the LA Times, New York Times, Wall Street Journal is a little bit better about this, and they say, shot protesters, as if they're people walking down the street saying, we protest. That's not what happened. Okay, now I feel I can speak about this safely because it's obvious to everybody here. But I want to share with you, I see this every single day in the coverage in the LA Times, New York Times, and NPR. It hasn't changed my politics. I'm a social liberal. I feel bad for the Palestinians. We should help them. I favor a two-state solution. It hasn't changed my politics. But I'm disappointed that when one side lies extremely, the other side should be impeccable with their word. But what they've done is, well, since you're lying, we're just going to lie a little bit. We're just going to mislead. We're just going to massage the facts. So if you ask me what we should do, everybody should make sure they vet everything they say and use the right words for the right phenomena. The most embarrassing that has happened, of course, on the border is the picture of the little girl, okay? And none of it was true. That did damage to the cause. That didn't help the cause, okay? That's my answer to your question. Let's all be impeccable with our word. Okay? Anybody want to respond to that?
The news that we're seeing is created by people who are motivated by ratings. That's their driver, because that's how they get paid. And they hunt every day for a picture that accentuates a viewership.
Yeah, thank you for that. Okay, so one thing, again, we're talking about the issue of a public that cares and does not want to be partisan. I'll call myself that. I think I have clear values. I have a command of the facts. I have understanding policies. I've expressed what my positions are. And I don't want to be misled or misinformed. Okay, but the news organizations don't have that commitment in general. In general, they want ratings, which is clicks, which is headlines that inflame the passions of the reader. Now, I turn my head away. I'm embarrassed. But other people, if you see a headline that favors your idea, you're going to go, yeah, right, you're going to click. Okay, so what you have is news consumption is a daily rally. Yeah, let's rally for our side. Now, the person knows that, so they write these outrageous headlines. I'll give you one example. Now, I haven't seen any evidence of any children being ripped from parents. I'm not saying it didn't happen. I've seen evidence, because I think I know what a child ripped from a parent looks like. So I'm looking for evidence, meaning a person's tightly closed their child, and someone rips the child away. So I read the story, and they never actually prove the headline that a child got ripped. I say, okay, I see what you're doing. You're inflaming passions to make people hate. I get it. It's good for you, good for your company. It's not good for America. But,
I know a lot of journalists, and I think they believe that what they're doing is taking the moral high ground.
Thank you for that.
They do.
Okay, very good. They're taking the moral high ground, which is the moral high ground is to undermine what's going on. And therefore, so their highest commitment, which is the news, it's not truth, it's the moral high ground. Okay, so as a trained ethicist, I think this is an abdication of their ethical responsibility, which is to report the news so we citizens can make choices. Now, what our press has become is more the European model, where newspapers were aligned to a political party. Okay, we've never actually admitted that here, but in Europe, it's just known. I remember when I was in Israel, and they said, "Why are you reading that newspaper?" I said, "Well, because it's out." No, that's that newspaper. We read this newspaper. I said, "What?" They said, "No, political parties publish a newspaper." I said, "Wow, I didn't know that." Okay, that's what's become here. So, I don't think I'm naive. You might just say I'm, I don't know, just hopeful that eventually newspapers report the news. Eventually.
if you
Yeah.
were at Fox or if you were at MSNBC, you'd get the story and you'd read, kids were removed from their parents. If you were then the news writer, you'd move from removed to taken, and you'd say, that's not as good. Ripped would be a cool
Yeah.
word. So you escalated to ripped, and you, each side then inflames the
Yeah,
other
okay.
side.
So we have consensus here that we who would like to get the news so we can form opinions based on facts, clear facts, values, policies, that the most news outlets don't share that value. They're profit-driven, and I think also issue-driven, meaning they want things to conclude a certain way, so they will use words to create a certain reality. Okay, so I think let's maybe just agree here. And again, I don't watch any cable news, so I mean, people tell me about it. I find it fascinating. But let's say that's not our purpose here. Our purpose here is to cut through the noise and talk about value, meaning whatever we say, okay, here's something that I think should be done, and here are my axioms, here are my facts as I know them, here are my value, here's the policy that I want. Okay? All right. So we're not going to talk about Trump. We're not going to talk about what newspapers do. I think there's seems to be consensus in here on that, which is great. Okay. So let's go and talk about if anybody wants to raise I have a lot on my mind, but I want to see what you guys want. Yeah.
I can't find it, but the email said that the subject was going to be moral decay.
Moral decay, yeah.
And so I kind of like to know what you mean by that.
Okay, so by moral decay, I mean if you look at the Trump side, they are claiming fake news, that there's a deep state, and there's like entrenched news medias who are colluding to undermine the presidency and overthrow it if they can. So they would say that side is suffering from moral decay. They don't care about the Constitution. They'll do anything they can to undermine this presidency. That's how they're right. Let's say the 30%ers over there. The 40% on the other side say, oh no, the truth decay, I like that term, by the way, the truth decay. Yeah, the truth decay is Trump and all his liars. So they both agree that there's a decay, but each one says the other one's at fault. So I will say the decay is these two sides who believe that the other one's at fault for the decay, but look at themselves. That's the decay that I see. So then what do we say who don't want to put all this blaming and accusing around? We're just going to calm ourselves down and say, well, let's just not do that. Let's actually look for what we can talk about, and that's how we fight the decay. So if someone says, I want to undermine the Trump presidency, here's how. I said, well, that's your goal, and what you're doing seems right. Okay, but just say that. Or I think there's a deep state that must be exposed. I said, okay, if that's your goal, then go ahead. Reveal the deep state. Go for it. I'd love to know what you come up with. Okay, so I'm not going to hate anybody, because that's what they want to do. Just like them to be open about it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so what we're doing here is we're fighting the decay. That's what actually this is about. And so people have said to me they can't talk to family, they can't talk to friends, families have been torn apart, friendships have been ruined. And I want to say, we don't have to do that, actually. Okay? And one way you do it is by understanding the values we have in common, and then exactly how we want those values to be realized. So I'll give you an example. Let's talk about the southern border for a little bit. Okay, so the issue seems to be people crossing the border illegally. Is that a decent way to frame it? And what do we do about that? So what seems to be is, if you're caught crossing the border illegally, apparently there is a previous policy earlier in Trump's presidency and under Obama, although I'm hearing different things, how different it really was. Yeah, and Bush, okay, which was a gentler approach. Maybe, no, you can't cross, go back. Or get the person in front of a judge right away and deported. So I heard that Obama deported 400,000 people, but they only got like a mile in, and then they booted them out. So this is a number that I read. So that the Trump administration has decided, no, if you cross the border, that's a crime and we're going to prosecute. That's what I understand. Now, that may have been happening under Trump and Obama, but what I've been told, might be true, might not be true, if that were a prior policy, it was not enforced as much, but it's being enforced more now. Okay? Does that sound factual?
Yes.
Yes and no. Okay, so it's equally enforced. Yes, I've read it was a law and it was occasionally enforced, but not to the degree that Trump has said he wants to enforce it. That Trump has actually said zero tolerance. Yeah, okay. No,
Okay,
go
now
ahead.
take issue with that.
With what? With exactly?
The exact issue is when people are seeking asylum.
Oh, I never said that. I said people crossing the
but
border
that
illegally.
is crossing the border for asylum.
Hold on a second.
That
Hold on a
is
second.
law
Okay.
that
No,
allows-
I want everybody to notice.
That's a law.
Hold
that
on.
allows
Hold on.
something
Hold on.
else.
Hold on. Hold on. Crossing the border to seek asylum is not illegal.
But it is held by the Trump administration as illegal.
Okay, pause. I've read nothing that says crossing the border to seek asylum is illegal. I haven't read anything on that.
I've heard they're being treated the same as illegal.
Okay, right.
Asylum seekers are being treated.
Okay, so now we have a factual question. The factual question, when a person shows up at the border and says, I'm seeking asylum, what happens next?
The same thing that happens to people who are crossing illegally.
Okay, so I've tried to read up on it, and what I've read is if you say asylum, by law, the Immigration Service, INS, Border Patrol, they have to put you in the asylum
Yeah,
pipeline.
well, that's the law. I've read different, don't know,
Got
as
it.
you would say, don't know if it's true or
Okay,
not.
okay, so what I've read is when you say asylum, the law is, and the Border Patrol, more or less, at some level, might be keeping that law, might not. We don't have the facts at hand, because I've read both. Okay? But let's focus on what I started with, which is,
Does everybody who shows up say asylum?
no. And here's why. As far as asylum law, as far as I understand asylum law, you have to be part of a persecuted group. You can't just be persecuted personally, and you can't just come from a country where there's no rule of law. You have to be part of a persecuted group. So if you show up and say, I'm seeking asylum, can we know why? Fill out this out. Well, I come from Guatemala and there's gang violence. I'm sorry, you can't seek asylum. Okay? Well, I'm not going to cross the border. Well, then we have to arrest you. If you don't walk back across the border, we have to arrest you. So as far as I understand the law, and again, I might understand it imperfectly, for asylum, you have to be part of a persecuted group, not a person running for your life, as far as I understand it. Yeah.
Well, I do a lot of asylum.
Oh, great. Wonderful. We have an expert in the room.
Well, I'm an expert who can tell you the law is very confused.
The law's confused. Okay, go ahead.
But you have to, I mean, you can't just automatically decide whether someone's in a group because that has to be tried to the immigration judge.
Got it.
And they will make a claim, because I'm part of this Christian group, I'm persecuted for that reason.
Okay.
Or because I'm part of this family,
Yeah.
I'm persecuted for that
But
reason.
what happens when they cross the border and they say, they've come to a legal border crossing, and they say, may I help you? They said, I'm seeking asylum. What happens then?
They should be allowed to prove their case.
Okay, and
But
so-
right now, the immigration system is so backed up, there's just, it's not gonna happen
Yeah.
for God knows how long.
Okay, see, that's what I'm sensing. I'm sensing that our infrastructure, the legal infrastructure on the southern border, is not built to capacity.
To say the least, it's
Yeah,
just gotten worse.
okay.
Because the way that the immigration system is being used now, they're overtaxed.
Yeah. Okay. So would we agree that the immigration system on the southern border is overtaxed? I mean, they're not up to the task.
During the Bush administration, there are actual numbers you can get of how many people came and sought asylum. And then
Okay.
during the Obama administration, but I don't know if it's increasing or decreasing.
I've heard that it's increasing from Mexico, but increasing from Central.
Yeah. Okay. That's a very good point. So what I'm hearing is decreasing from Mexico, but increasing from, you might call, relatively failed states in Central America. So I have a question. Once they arrive in Mexico, if they're seeking asylum, does Mexico have any obligation to give them asylum? Does anybody know?
I would think so, because if you're running for your safety and you're now in
Yeah.
a safe country.
Okay, so thank you. So I have a question that I'm hoping someone can answer. If you're running from Guatemala and you hit Mexico, why isn't asylum granted in Mexico?
Should be.
Does anybody know?
No,
Does Mexico have any asylum system?
nobody's ever
Okay, so see, my question is, and again, it's a question, does Mexico have any responsibility to handle the cases of asylum seekers who come into their country?
If they do, they're not taking it.
From a human rights perspective, I think they have an absolute responsibility as far as I understand from the UN. Meaning all this is under a kind of a UN understanding that if a person crosses your border, seeks asylum, you got to take it seriously. So I'm not sure how people get all the way through Mexico to the northern border without getting asylum in Mexico. I'm not sure how that happens. And I would like someone to tell me. Arthur, do you know the answer to this question?
I'm not sure if I know the answer, but I recall hearing a report a few nights ago where Mexico, talking to people in the situation, Mexico had become a destination choice on the route. In other words, they weren't trying to make it the United States necessarily. So there are factions that, and I think what's happened in the U.S. being making it so difficult for people to get here.
All right, so I want to understand your question. Yeah, I want to understand. So people from Guatemala make it to Mexico, and then what happens?
I think there are some subgroups, when I understand that, or that's their destination.
Their destination is Mexico.
In Guatemala,
Because you're so far away, I'm not following you. When they get to Mexico, are they saying, we seek asylum in Mexico?
I believe that was.
Got it. But my question is, apparently, the tens of thousands who get all the way through Mexico and present themselves on our border. I'm just wondering how this is possible. If there's a policy that says you can't seek asylum here, we have to push you north. Okay, I'd like to know the answer to that. Anybody know? Okay, I think it's an important question. Pardon me? No, I've tried. Believe I have really worked. I have tried. One thing I did find out is under Mexican immigration rules, it says that Mexico is interested in keeping demographic stability. So that means they can keep out classes of people that will upset their demographic system. Now, what does that sound like, everybody here? That sounds like racism. Right? Meaning that's the very thing that people are militating against. You can't keep people out because they're going to change your demographic numbers. But what I read is that's exactly Mexico's stated policy. I was shocked to read that. And you guys can tell me if you've read that and you're shocked to read it. Does anybody know anything about that? Okay, so so the questions that I have is, what's Mexico's responsibility here, number one? And number two, what happens when Mexico says, anybody who comes to our country, asylum, immigration, we push them to the northern border? What happens when that's, again, this is one of those what ifs, but when that's 100,000 people? Okay? I mean, at what point do we have to do something else than say everybody gets a day in court if you say asylum? Or if you get arrested, everybody has a day in court before you're deposed? I mean, what happens when there's, really tens of thousands of people on the border? Okay, so I don't know if anybody has an opinion about that. Does anybody have an opinion what should be done at that point? Yeah, William?
I don't know if I have an opinion of what should be done, but it seems from what I've been reading that it's a worldwide situation. There's a lot of problems in the world. There's a lot of people that are oppressed or suffering in some way who are trying to get from where they are to someplace safer. And there seems to be more and more sort of nationalism building that's saying we need to put a stop to this in some way.
Yeah, very good.
And that's,
Yeah. So I think it's factual that Europe is sensing a saturation point. That's number one. But again, it's interesting to me, and I'm not trying to be polemical. It's a serious question I've had, and I just haven't heard an answer. When Syrian refugees got to Turkey, they're no longer in Syria. So I don't understand how you can be in Turkey and then say I'm a refugee when you go to Greece. Because when you're in Turkey, you're out of Syria. When you're in Turkey, you're out of Syria. When you go to Greece, it sounds like you're an economic refugee, not refugee from the problem in Syria. But there seems to be some kind of norm that says when you're a refugee, you stay a refugee until you get the place you want to go. Not when you become safe, but where you get where you want to go. That seems to be the norm that I don't quite understand. Was there?
Well, would Turkey permit people to stay put?
Ah, very good. Okay, so BBC was in Turkey, and I was waiting for them to ask that question. So what the person said is, now remember, anecdotal, the person says, the Turks don't like us here. But I didn't hear anybody say the Turks are kicking us out. So there seems to be a norm that I've never heard articulated, that if you're a refugee until you get to where you want to go, not as soon as you get out. Yeah.
No, I think you're a refugee until you get to a place where there is a system in place that can absorb you, because I don't know, when they get to Turkey, can they get a temporary resident visa or a temporary?
Yeah, so that's a factual question. Turkey has about
They're still refugees.
Turkey has about 1.5 million. Turkey seems to be set up for refugees.
Well,
But-
I'm, like, when I compare it to the case in Venezuela, for example, so many people that have emigrated from Venezuela under duress have been able to establish themselves in the neighboring countries, in those countries where they put a system in place, and they are.
Okay, so we're talking about refugees from Venezuela going to neighboring countries. They have a system in place. What I'm answering you that Turkey does have a system in place.
Okay.
There's more than 1 million people in the system. It's the question for people who are leaving Turkey, right? Were they expelled from Turkey? See, I've not seen any